All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the user group. This is Mike, Seth, and Alex Dupler. We have a special guest with us. With not a lot of fanfare tonight, we just kind of want to jump in. Alex, welcome to the user group. We really appreciate you jumping in here.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Excellent.
The soft landing there.
Yeah, exactly.
Happy
Yeah.
Tuesday.
There it is. That's what we needed.
Unlike this morning, we've got things connected and working. All for Alex. All for what I'm excited to hear all about today.
Yeah.
In the Power BI Pug user group presentation.
It's good to be here. I haven't done a presentation as opposed to just like a live stream in like a year.
It's like the same thing.
Yeah,
Well,
basically.
Well, the difference is that usually when Alex and I do live streams, we don't really prepare. We just come up with some notes.
Welcome to our
spent, like,
podcast.
multiple hours putting together content here.
Nice,
so
nice.
It's a whole other level.
I went over to Copenhagen to go to speak to some people over there. That was a lot of fun. I went down to Houston, got to speak there at another event. It was very refreshing to have people around and going to an actual event. Even though the events were kind of lightly attended, it was still really exciting to just kind of be around the event space again. And you know what? People in Texas, they just don't care about masks. So they're like, please require you have masks. And like literally the day two, no one was wearing anything. It was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing here. Great. I'll go with it. So we'll roll with it. Anyways, tonight's topic is a very intriguing header title. We try to say, show the API some love. And I guess it would be helpful for us to give a little bit of background, how this came about. I guess, Alex, we kind of I shoehorned you into this one, this engagement, this speaking engagement. You were talking about some challenges you were having inside Microsoft, and you are a Microsoft employee, around distributing very large data models to a larger team. And so we're like, how are you going to solve this? And you're like, well, I kind of liked content packs, but they're not good. We don't want to use them again. We want to do something better. And so you kind of described this solution that we're going to talk about today about this. And we're like, oh yeah, this is a great topic. Can you do November or October? Like, when can we get you in? So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I'm also going to reprise this at the Seattle Power BI user group in like 3-4 weeks. So that one will be
the test drive.
Twice as good. I'll have practiced it.
Well, we appreciate that you're using us as your test bed, Alex.
Yeah, we will
always do that. That's technically for all our other users in the group. What this group is designed to do is bring in presenters that are experienced, like Alex, but also those that haven't before. So what a platform you have. All you have to do is ping us in the chat, and
we will light you up.
We'll get you front loaded into a 15-minute presentation.
Sure.
Dan Weiser.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Dan, we had to get on the horn for this. So hopefully Dan will show up here in the chat window a little bit. Usually he's pretty on point with that.
He's here already.
Oh, you already see him chatting?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Well, welcome all. Alex, we're just going to, without any further ado, thank you very much for presenting. This is the Milwaukee and Chicago user groups. For those of you who are tuning in line, feel free to follow us. I'll put some links probably in the YouTube chat or the different chat things. Please make sure you go follow us. We have a lot of content coming out. Alex was just asking us. You guys are doing like 4 hours of YouTube a week. Like, yeah, I guess we are. We're doing a lot of content creation. So please follow us. We're trying to give you a lot of good tips and tricks, and we're integrating with the best people who know, work with the biggest models, work with the hardest problems. And so Alex is one of those guys who knows a lot. With that, Alex, take it away, buddy.
Yeah, let's take a look at my screen here and let's see. So today we're going to talk about an unexpected Power BI solution. And so we're going to go on a little bit of a journey before we get into the meat of it. And we'll just sort of set the stage with, and let's see if my screen computer will change slides. Here we go. We're going to talk about a story that's very common in the sales org. The salesperson goes to the customer and says, hey, I looked at the data, and if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to have a better outcome. Oh, and by the way, you're going to spend more money. I'm going to hit my quota, but don't worry about that part. It's going to be great for you. And you show them the data, and the customer says, hey, that's really helpful. And then there's a list of things that can happen. All of them derail things like, hey, these numbers are not quite right. They're not up to date. Or, great, I want to focus on this particular category. Or great, I want to look at this report every day. Can you do that for me? And these are the Power BI problems. It's just, instead of it being between you and a manager, it's between the salesperson and the customer. So how would we go about solving this problem? I know that there's probably some solutions off the top that people might think about. So maybe let's brainstorm a little bit. I know Mike here really likes embedded reports, so maybe that's a list. Anybody else have other ideas they want to put in the chat on what they might do?
And I just threw a comment in there, so please ask questions. This is an interactive session. Alex
Yeah.
would like you to feedback to us. Please, as you ask questions, how would you guys solve this?
Yeah.
Actually, I should transition to the screen where there's like more of us in one screen here, so we can we can all talk and it looks like it's real. We're not ventriloquisting you.
So one thing that's been a common refrain in these conversations on this channel, on other channels, is maybe we should use a shared data set, right? I think that's the session that I was here where I got roped into doing this presentation. Mike was going about the wonders of shared data sets and what all you should do. So maybe you build a shared data set. Maybe it's got every customer or just the customers that your salespeople actually talk to. Maybe it's a composite model. Maybe you have to compromise. I started pulling together the data to solve this problem that we have, and the raw data that we pulled together, it was 1 trillion rows.
Oh my
And I
god.
went back to my dev team. I was like, okay, we gotta cut some requirements out here. But even if it's 100 million rows, which I think would be quite common, that's a challenging Power BI model. Plus, your customers are going to access this model. So you need to host it. You could do B2B sharing. You could do embedding in a web portal. And if you're going to do those things, you need to do security on the model, because you don't want your customers to see your other customers' data. That's real bad. So you might have dynamic row level security. You might have a process where your salespeople request that their customers get access, or you might try to integrate it with the website of your product. All of that sounds like a nightmare. And it's going to be a large data set. So let's talk a little bit about, well, before we do that, we're just going to start with the metaphor of this presentation, which is that what we're building is a big and complex monolith. So we said it's going to be a large data set. Let's talk about what makes a data set large. What do you guys think? Seth, Mike, what's the number one thing that makes data sets large?
GUIDs.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. GUIDs is key. GUIDs is all over your data model. That'll make it large. I would say tables that have high cardinality, right? A lot of text things in them. Oh, I got one right.
Exactly. So, and the next question is, and just for folks that are listening, cardinality is the number of unique values. What is usually the highest cardinality dimension in any model?
Ooh, good question.
Anything jump out to people?
Users online, they're a little bit delayed, so they're going to take them just a moment here to get there.
Yeah. Well, we can wait here. I've been charging ahead.
That's okay. It's good.
Yeah.
Come on, Dan Meisner.
I'm gonna go with
sales orders. Dan says sales orders.
Text values.
Yeah.
Highest cardinality.
Are you looking for something more specific?
What kind of text values?
I'm going to say it's like it wouldn't be customer
names
name.
of things.
Yeah.
Product names or what is the highest cardinality dimension? I mean, dates is a lot of painful parts. I mean, there's a lot of date things that I think dates are stored as text, right? Is that, or is it a number actually?
I mean, in my world, URLs.
Oh yeah, URLs would be a bear.
Domains can be really big. I'm going to contend that in most models, especially like if you look at AdventureWorks, it's going to be the customer dimension. And yes, they're going to have addresses and names and phone numbers. Those are attributes, but like the dimension, usually you have more customers than products. You have more customers than stores or employees. There's a few businesses where that's not true, but those are exceptions. So in most data sets, the customer dimension is by far the biggest impact. So when we were talking before about, hey, how are we going to do this model? Should we have every customer? Should we somehow be picky and be like, hey, we're only going to offer this service to top customers? That's a difficult thing to do, especially if you have a big data set with lots of history, because if that list of customers changes, now you need to go regenerate more history. It really throws a wrench in your incremental deployment. So you really are going to be tempted to just have all the customers.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when you
Yeah.
look at, like, I mean, this is the guidance I go to when I start with new companies who are kind of just checking this out for the first time. One of the
Mhm.
first things I see is they break every data model by customer. And so I work
Yeah.
with clients right now that every single model has a single customer focus, and because there's something unique about that customer or whatever they're doing. And my first entry into this is like, nah, Power BI can handle a lot of records. Like, we can get to hundreds of millions of records and not really have a problem. And so my first inclination is actually merge the customers together into like the big monolithic model, because then it's the same for everyone. I really like that scenario. But I could totally see how we're now bumping up to something where we've got oodles and oodles of customers. I mean, I guess I would assume in Microsoft's land, it could be a client where there's a couple people all the way up to
Yeah.
large corporations. So you could have hundreds of millions of customers in your world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think, like, if you think about like the CPG type world where there's distributors, you could have a very tight list of customers. And that might be one of the exceptions where this is not true. But for example, I work at Microsoft's advertising business, and we have a self-serve website where you can go and swipe your credit card and buy an ad on a keyword. And so our customer dimension has about 7 million customers. Um, and that's a relatively small customer dimension for Microsoft. If you think about Xbox or Office or Windows, right? Those are more like a billion records because it's consumers rather than businesses. So let's pivot again and say, what makes a data set slow? So hopefully, since this has been up a little longer, maybe the chat will have caught up. But you know, data sets.
Users across the community, where are you finding the
Yeah,
slowness part of your data set? What is
yeah.
causing the most pain in your data
And
model?
and let's set aside a bad data set, and let's just say, okay, we've
Yep.
done all the right things. What makes a data set slow just by its very nature?
Waiting for Dan Meisner or Kevin
Yeah,
Arnold to jump here with a comment.
yeah.
Calling you guys out directly. Yeah, I know you guys are trying to like eat food and listen to a podcast or a video on your phone.
That's okay. Yeah.
So I mean, if I were going to say slowness of data sets, right? So it's
Mhm.
really when you have, I think here is when you're trying to aggregate across too much of the information, right? There's only so that you can compress to a point, right? And so you're going to get the columnar store on something. Um, but when you have to go through many, many, many rows and you get down to like that customer level dimension, right? You have a lot of small things you have to go across. So when you start adding customer dimensions to a table and then trying to do sums on top of them, you're now running lots of little queries or trying to get through all of that information across those different, let's call it partitions of the data set. You're looking at all those rows and trying to aggregate that up. I think that's when you're going to have those problems potentially.
Yeah. That's
Kevin
definitely
Arnold.
good. We've also got some things in the chat now. So
Yeah.
large number of fact records, merging on text. Seth, were you going to say something?
I was just going to read off the chat, but you are
Yeah.
all over it, man.
Great. So those are also good. I think I was thinking
Like
a
iterators, I
little
was
bit.
thinking too. Like if you have to do something in line, like it's
Yeah.
a row level calculation, and then potentially doing like an aggregate across that might be kind of expensive as well.
Yeah, those definitely aren't expensive uh, functionalities. In this case, we're actually going to come back to our foreshadowing from before. So a large model is slower than a smaller model. Like, yes, if you just take a column with 100 million records and just do sum on it, and there's no dimensions and there's nothing else, it's super fast. But obviously, it's slower than if that was a column of 1,000 records. Even more importantly is the cardinality of your relationships. What I've found is that the really big thing that makes models slow is when passing a filter from a dimension to the fact, the key between those two is super high cardinality. And if you watch, there's been a couple SQL BI videos recently on like the differences between a snowflake schema and a star schema. It really pops out in that video where when you have the snowflake, you end up with this really high cardinality relationship. The example they were using was between like order headers and like order details, and you end up with like order key as the relationship. That super large relationship really slows things down. Okay. And then the other thing, coming back to what we were talking about before, is a must for this solution is some sort of dynamic RLS, especially if it's on our high cardinality dimension. Now, every query has a filter on this relationship that's slow. Okay. So maybe this isn't going to be a very good experience for our customers if we build this big data set. So let's also talk for a second here about what's going to drive cost and resource consumption. So the most important thing on the premium capacity in Gen 2 is CPU time. That's what you're metered on. That's what costs money. And the size of the largest model is really important as well. In Gen 1, it was the total memory event that you used by all your models on the capacity. But in Gen 2, you can have as many models as you want, as long as you put, as long as the largest model is smaller than the size limit of the capacity you bought. So if you have a P1, I think it's 25 gigs, and if you have a P2, it's 50. And that 25 gigs is not just the size of the model, but it also includes for that model, the overhead to serve queries and do those types of things, overhead for refreshes, etc. So you can't have a 25 gig model, but you could certainly have a 12 or 15 gig model for sure, if you're being smart about incremental refresh. But if we're going to do this big customer model, you're going to need like a P3. And in fact, for my business, because our customer dimension is so big, the solution that I'm trying to build, there's no capacity you can buy. We would have to go buy a VM with 2 terabytes of RAM and run SQL Server on-prem to be able to fit the data needed for the requirements we have for every customer. So maybe there's another way.
More foreshadowing.
Yeah. And maybe we're starting. So I started thinking about, and this has been an ongoing problem with our business for years. For years, salespeople have been like, "Hey, we want to have these data sets," and they'll get some combination of the answer of, "You can't have the granularity you want without being more than like you can only have 2 weeks, or you can only have 6 months at the monthly grain, or at the weekly grain, or whatever. You have to make very substantial sacrifices, not because you need that old data, but you can't do your period comparison metrics, which really detracts from the analysis. So I was thinking, and I sort of had a brainstorm, that what we need is we need to have a data set with only one customer. So how can we do that? How can each customer have their own data set? That's, my org, we've got a couple hundred salespeople. They've each got, several customers. How can I make 1,000 data sets? Well, there's an obvious solution, which is template apps, right? How many people have installed like Reed's Google Analytics report? It's probably 1,000. 38 people have reviewed it. So maybe this is a starting point. But has anybody here actually tried to make a template app before?
Ooh.
I'm gonna,
Me. Ooh.
yeah,
That's not
I'm
that
gonna
easy.
guess most people have not.
I'm a very rare
Most of
person.
us don't have big public Power BI websites and try to generate leads for our Power BI consulting business. Most of us want to do things internally, but maybe there's a way to use template apps internally. So let's take a look at what happens when we check this box when we create a workspace. The first thing that happens is we get a workspace and there's a new flag here, a new option called release management. What does that do? Well, once we've created an app, and you can see here, I just grabbed a random report, which happened to be a Power BI file that Jeff Weir sent me showing how to do dynamic format strings with calculation groups. Once we've created the app, there's this new, in that release management tab, there's this testing thing, and you can get a link. And in a minute, we'll see what happens when you get the link. But first, as always, we need to metaphorically head over to the laptop. So let's do it.
Let's borrow a phrase from the guy in a cube guys, because
Yeah,
they're using our PowerBI.tips moniker
yeah,
on Saturdays, so we can use their
exactly.
"Let's go to the
Okay,
laptop."
so here we are. We're in the workspace that we were just looking at on the slide. I'm going to click on release management, and we're going to get a link. And we get this link, and I'm going to open a new tab. And nope, I accidentally hit a keyboard key as I hit it. And one thing I want to highlight as this link is loading is that the link is versioned. We'll come back to that, but that's pretty nice. So what it's doing now is it's making a copy of the workspace and the app. So we're going to install the app, and it's going to show up as just one more workspace and one more app in your list. So the person who went to the link gets the workspace and the app. If you are the publisher of the template app, you have no access to this new copy. But we're building our app and we're going to get prompted. So first, it's going to load with sample data, which is the data that was in the report as we published it. So here I'm just looking at a list of dates. If we click around, we can see the nice examples Jeff put together. Really nice stuff, but our examples here. So we're going to connect to data, and it's going to prompt you to fill out any parameters that were in the Power Query. And actually, if we come back to the workspace, when we created the app, if it'll go, in a template app workspace, there are new options. You can manage the parameters, and you can say whether or not they're required and provide some samples.
Hey, Alex,
You could,
real quick,
yeah.
it's a little. You have great resolution on your screen. Do you by
Mhm.
chance have zoom it, so maybe we can get into a little bit larger on some
Yeah,
of those items?
I do. In
Awesome.
fact,
There we
it's
go. That's
fun.
what we're looking for. Much
Yeah.
better. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So in the template app, just to recap, when you go to create an app, there's a few more options that you didn't have before. Let me see if I can do, yeah, the live control 4. There we go. And so
Boom.
one of them is you can specify, hey, I want them to authenticate to this data source this way. There's some other options, like if you were doing something like uh what's it called? John White over at Bifocal, they've got their tie graph where you can like hook it up to your internal stuff, and they actually host some databases for you. There's different ways to use this, but in this case, what we've done is the I can put in the parameter for my data set. So right now it's set to 2021. If I put in 2019, because I set this up yesterday, it has my credentials for this data source. But if you went to this link, you would be prompted to authenticate to my Databricks cluster when you hit this button. Maybe we even will here. We'll see. And so now I have made a copy of my workspace. And it was very easy to do. All I had to do was check a box when I created my workspace. So this is a really cool functionality. And if we come back while we wait for this to happen, if we come back to this view under release management, as long as you keep it to testing, it'll only work internally. If we hit promote app, now we're starting to go into this is available publicly. So for our hypothetical sales solution, we want to stay in testing land. And if, say, we were to come in here to this report and maybe we make some changes, right? Let's add a field to our visual and hit publish.
Can
Right?
I clarify what you just mentioned there? So
Yeah.
an internal user of your organization can go grab apps from App Source that are only in testing. Is that what I heard you say?
So if you give them that link,
Oh, if you give them the link,
generated
got
from
it.
here,
Okay, got it. This
then
is the key.
they will
Okay,
get that workflow.
got it.
That won't show up in App Source until you go through the App
full
Source
got
release
it. Okay,
process.
I missed that part. That makes
But
sense.
if you've got like a link shortener function like we have at Microsoft, you could put it behind a nice aka.ms/ the super cool sales app. You could make it feel official with just the link.
Nice.
So we've got that. We just updated our report. So now I'm going to update my app, right? So push new changes to the app. And now when I go to release management, yeah, we'll see that now it's version 2. And so when I get my link here and we come to the end, you'll see the link is also versioned to version 2. So this could work really well, but it has some real downsides that we discovered as we investigated this possibility. So we'll go, before we do that, we'll just come back to here because it finally finished. So we put in our parameter and now we're going to sign in to connect to the data source. And so I'll go through the auth process. And here I'll just zoom in while this is going. And now my report, if I come up to the workspace here and go to the workspace, you'll see that it's refreshing the data set based on our new parameter. And so once that refresh finishes, and it's automatically configured. So we check the box for scheduled refresh. And so it's automatically configured to refresh daily. And I believe the default is midnight when there's no time specified. So it's just going to auto refresh at midnight. That could be problematic if you have dozens or hundreds of these copies sitting around, if they all fire their refresh at the same time. So that's one downside to this. So our report finished refreshing because all I did was load the date table. And so now we'll see that we have the data for 2019. So if instead it was the date table that I had put the parameter on, if I put it on the customer table, we could have a new data set that was custom for that customer. And we have a full workspace. They can create Live Connect reports off of it and all of that stuff. But let's go back to the slides and talk about some of the downsides. So don't use template apps internally because the admins won't be permissioned on the workspace. So I created this workspace. Whoever clicked that link owns the workspace. And so if you have a bug in your report, you can't fix it very easily. There is an update mechanism where we can push the app to version 2 that we just made the version 1, but the user has to pull it. So you can imagine where you push out an update and then you find a bug in the report. And now you need to frantically email all your salespeople that says, hey, if you updated to version 3, you need to update to version 4. And here are the directions, right? Like that's a horrible experience. You definitely don't want to do that. And maybe worst of all, you don't get any telemetry, which I thought was a bit of a bummer that even like template app authors that go all the way through the process, I don't think they get any telemetry on how much their reports are being used.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I do think when you go through the process, when you set up a template app, it'll prompt you to like get an email. So like Reed will get a list of leads
Mm-hmm,
from
mm-hmm.
people that create his or use his template,
Yeah,
but he doesn't actually know how much they're using it,
got it.
which for Reed's purposes is perfect with the Google Analytics thing. But
Exactly.
for you internally that want to prove out that your internal project deserves investment, telemetry is really important. So let's try to reimagine template apps so that we can let our forest of little trees bloom here. So the basics is we need to copy the workspace, change the parameter, and refresh.
Seems simple.
Seems simple. Well, we went and we did, and we came up with an architecture for the app, and this is the workflow that we came up with.
Amazing.
So let's talk a little bit about the steps. So we're going to have a Power App or maybe a website. We were thinking about maybe just doing the website in Python instead. But whatever, the seller goes in and they provide us the customer ID. Our compliance folks want to make sure that sellers for Amazon aren't pulling the data for Walmart. And so we're going to check to see if the seller is authorized to build that customer's report. And then we don't want to have 5 different data sets for Amazon, even though we're allowing ourselves to be comfortable with having dozens of data sets. We don't want to have a huge waste here. And then if the customer does have a workspace, we want to tell the user, hey, these are the people that have this workspace. You should go ask them to add you to it. So we'll use the get group users API for the GUID of the workspace, which we logged way down in step 9 at the end of the process. So once we've done all that, we're also going to ask the salesperson one more question, which is, do you need this report to be refreshed daily or weekly? Because most of the time, they're not going to talk to their customer all the time. But some customers are going to want to look at the report all the time. And so we'll pre-configure our refresh schedule based upon what the salespeople tell us. We may even just default to weekly and then just tell salespeople like, hey, if your customer actually wants daily, here's how to go into the workspace and change the refresh schedule.
I like that idea.
But that's roughly the workflow. So now that we've figured out what we're going to do, we create a workspace. We use the imports API, which this took me for a while to find in the documentation, because there's you'd think it would be on like copy a data set or like, no. What we have to do is we're going to have a Power BI file in a SharePoint site, and then this API can suck in the file from the SharePoint site and publish it to the workspace. So once we have our data set, we can
I think we
configure.
need to pause there for a moment. You're good.
Yeah.
I just want to let the world know we've had a lot of. I've gotten beat up a lot in the podcast around SharePoint sites, and so Seth, hold on, so unmute. Hold on. Yeah, you were laughing. I've gotten a lot of flack on SharePoint and things, from the guys. And I want to just reiterate that very important point that Alex just made there. That was Alex is saying, go to SharePoint and pull the Power BI file from SharePoint. I'll let that marinate for those of you who are out there, those of you who follow the podcast.
well, Mike, I'll just point out that that's how the API was designed.
Oh,
not necessarily how I would design it.
Oh no.
How would you design it, Alex, if it wasn't SharePoint?
I mean, SharePoint, it should definitely work with SharePoint. We keep our main Power BI files in Azure DevOps, so it would be great if we could suck it from there.
Okay. Right. All right. Fair.
It would also be great if we could pull it from another workspace, just like we just watched. But you can't do that. You can copy reports, but you can't copy data sets.
Gotcha.
Now that we have our data set, we need to configure it. So we're going to set the parameter using the update parameters API. We're going to bind credentials to the data set. So we need, like we have published our data set, we need to attach to the data set the credentials to hit the Databricks. And even though this data set doesn't use a gateway, you still use the gateway API to do that. That was another thing that took me a little bit of, are you sure that's right? Looking around, but basically there's a virtual gateway that's part of all the cloud data sets, and that's how the API works. So once we've done that, we'll trigger a refresh for the data set and set the schedule. Then once that's going, we'll go through the rest of the process, which is that we copy the reports from the template workspace. So we have a workspace set up with everything there, and we just copy the reports. And there's a clone report in group API to do that. And then we bind the reports to the new data set. So when we deployed the data set, actually we needed another API call to get its GUID after we deployed it. And then we can bind the reports to that data set's GUID instead of the template data set. And finally, we add permissions to the workspace to the user who requested the workspace to begin with, as well as our admin team. And then once the refresh is done, we'll email the user saying, hey, here's your workspace and all your reports. And then finally, we log all these GUIDs because in the future, we're going to want another program that can push updates to the fleet of workspaces. So we've almost completely re-implemented the template app functionality.
But better.
It's better for our uses. And like, yes, this is hard, but this isn't as hard as building a trillion row Power BI data set that performs well, right? This is a 2 to 4 week project, depending on how experienced you are with the APIs in PowerShell. This is not a multi-month effort where you multiple times you look at how much it costs to hire Marco and Alberto to consult on your performance. This is very, very doable.
This is cool. I really like this.
So let's come back to capacity usage, because that's the really important thing, or one important thing is this going to blow up my capacity? And the answer is probably not. We have just as many customers looking at just as many reports, but the queries are faster because the data sets are an order of magnitude smaller. Now, maybe because the queries run in, 5 seconds instead of 60, we actually get more usage, but that's a good problem to have, not a bad problem. You might use more memory sometimes. Usually, not all the customers are going to look at their reports all the time, right? This isn't their full-time job. There's only going to be a few customers looking at a report at any given time. Anyway, it's Gen 2. It doesn't matter. That's Microsoft's problem. They have to provide memory for all the models that you deploy to your Pro, Premium per user, or Premium capacity workspaces. So in our example, because we're Microsoft, and our B2B sharing users automatically get licenses, I'm just going to have these in Pro or PPU because I don't have to license our customers because Microsoft is special. But you'll at any other company, you'd have this in premium capacity because your salespeople aren't going to be licensed, let alone your customers. So the big, there's a Windows 11 bug where every once in a while my Bluetooth keyboard freaks out and just sends the same keystroke a bunch of times.
It's from the Nuck Boys. It's just send it arc to the end.
Exactly. It's very annoying.
Full send on the keyboard.
I'm surprised they haven't fixed it already, but you're going to have way more refreshes. This is the big downside here. Now, fortunately, you may actually be refreshing less data because while before we decided that we couldn't pick which customers were going to be in the data set because it was just impractical to do incremental refresh, your salespeople aren't going to go out and go through this process for every customer. They're only going to do it for customers that they have a conversation with that leverage the insights the reports deliver. And Power BI will suspend your refreshes if the customer doesn't use the report for 2 months. And so you may actually be refreshing less data, but it's possible that you'll have many more refreshes. Sure, they'll be loading way less data, but it could be a problem. And you may run into some CPU usage problems here. So you're going to want to be really sure that everything's folding so that your refresh CPU consumption is pretty low. And then finally, the tables on the data source side are really big, because even though you got it out of your cube, you still need to have all the data available so that any customer can be requested. And so you need to make sure that you're getting really good index coverage, or if you're in something like Databricks, that your filter predicate, your customer filter, is actually getting you partition elimination, so that when the queries run in your data warehouse, they are really efficient, because you're going to be hitting this, super big table, terabyte table, and you're going to want to not have to have a terabyte of the table in memory while it figures out which rows to send. That's probably the hardest part of this project. But fortunately, that's a problem that you can deal with over time. It's also a problem that you can solve with money if you get into problems, because assuming you're on one of the various MPP stuff and not on flat SQL server, you can always just set up a bigger cluster. So we're on Databricks. If we get into problems, I can just set up a cluster with 20 nodes and, go explain to my manager that I need to hire a Databricks consultant so that I can get that 20 nodes back down, because I can't figure it out. But that's a much more manageable problem than trying to do the trillion row data set with dynamic RLS and making sure that you never have a data exposure on the RLS side. So that's it. Nobody ever said growing a forest was easy, but maybe having gone through this deck, now you can see the forest instead of just one big tree.
Oh, I love it.
Was that an action item to go plant some little saplings in the ground?
Yeah, that's right.
I like this.
Tree blossom.
I think this is pretty slick. Very neat solution.
Yeah.
There's a lot of richness in the APIs, and I was actually curious, Alex, in doing this and kind of getting through this together. Were there any? So I had worked with Rui Romano out of I think it's Spain is where he's out of. Works for DevScope, really smart guy. Just got hired by Microsoft. I think moving over to Microsoft pretty soon. So very happy for him. He's a smart guy. He had a really interesting sequence of scripts around. We called it Power BI DevOps kind of things.
Yeah.
Were some of those kind of helpful? I know I sent you some code on that. I said, hey, here's some ideas that maybe kind of start the noodle churning here on some of this. Did any of that help?
Yeah, so I sent those scripts to my developer.
He's like, they're crap. We got to write them all.
Well, I'm not the PowerShell expert on our team. I'm the PM and architect. So I'm not actually doing anything except figuring out what the best approach is.
Oh, gotcha.
But last I met with him, we were still trying to decide whether we wanted to do the whole thing in Python or have a Power Apps plus PowerShell solution. So my assumption is that the scripts were not close enough to exactly what we want to do.
Gotcha.
That we are able to just like fully commit to the PowerShell.
Gotcha.
We have a lot of requirements in here about tracking state and making sure that we log all these GUIDs so that we can push things out.
Sure.
Because we're not just trying to do like a DevOps process where we're doing deployments. We're trying to sort of maintain a fleet of siblings or clones. So yeah.
Excellent. So anyone online, I guess we'll go throw up some questions here. If anyone got questions about the solution, anyone done something similar along those lines? Oh, everyone's digging. Love the presentation. I think it's a really good, solid concept. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it, Kevin. Yeah, I think this is pulling through some of the ideas here. I mean, Seth and I have worked on some pretty big models and a lot of large customer things. I'm just generalizing here, but like thinking about your company, right? There's always that 80-20 rule. And when I was doing more consulting for someone else, we looked at like, here's the spend by customer, right? Here's what that curve looks like. And it's kind of more like an exponential curve. You get like a lot of these little smaller customers towards the tail, but you get like the couple of the bigger customers at the front end of that, front loads this. It really is interesting to me that you could, you build this kind of monolithic model that's for all these things, but if you parameterize it correctly, you can lift some of those premium guys. They want performance, they want large models, they want all this stuff, and you can kind of cater the experience for them a bit by using this kind of technique. And even not for every client, like you guys have, many more, but you could even pick out those first couple, 5, 6, and say these guys are worth it enough for us to make sure that they're happy with their data. Let's build this thing for them so they can get, and maybe this is something along the lines where you could say, if there's a parameter, chop the data for these 1 clients at a time, and then everyone else kind of gets like the star method, right? These are all the star clients, and when that happens, just reload everyone else, but except those, or something along those lines. So you could maybe do some interesting things there where you have, 6, 7, 8 models, and there's 1 model per customer for the largest customers, and then in the rest of the spectrum, you've got kind of this generalized model for everyone, because you're now paying for query compute time, right? Not everyone's going to be hitting the model at the same time. The smaller customers probably won't be coming in as often. The big guys will likely be hitting the model more heavily. And maybe you want dedicated capacity. And frankly, even from a financial spend standpoint, you guys are doing all premium per user, but I'm thinking something around, looking at this going, well, holy smokes, like if my biggest client says I'm done or leaves, I can tie it to a premium SKU and turn off the premium SKU and turn off their reporting. So that's no longer, you can easily scrub that data out of your data model and not have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. So all that's true. And definitely, like, for example, we started where there's one of our very large customers where we basically did, so we've got 4 or 5 different reports the salespeople have been putting together. And
Sure.
that's the other piece, is that right now they do these reports and share them with the customer. But the way they do it is that they go into the UI of our SaaS platform and they export the data and load it to a Power BI for that meeting. And then when they have the next meeting, they do it again. And so we spend
So wasteful.
an ungodly amount of money building and refreshing these reports. And
only to have people dump it back out to get it into another report.
Yeah, exactly. So you could, and so like we started looking at this one customer, they had a specific need, and they're like, hey, if you can show us this data reliably, we'll spend millions more. Like, literally, it was like, okay, great. We'll do literally anything.
All right, bar
to
set.
get that money.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. And so we did one for one customer.
Yeah.
And then it was sort of at the same time I was dreaming up this scheme, but it was a little bit different.
Sure.
The insights they wanted were different from the insights that I was trying to solve for the whole business.
Sure.
And it occurred to me, I was like, oh, I can parameterize this too. And yes, this insight is really only applicable to one group of customers.
Mm-hmm.
While I did a very hands-on, multiple meetings with the account team, work to develop a report for this one customer.
Yeah.
Now their competitors can also get those same insights because, Bing is an auction marketplace. So, getting people to bid against each other is exactly the game we're in. And so that's another big part, is that for us, yes, we can give very hands-on care to our top customers, but we don't want to give them special treatment because we want their competitors to be competitive in the auction.
Sure.
We want everybody to get good, fair results. And so we do want to scale this out to our tail. And so one of the other things we're thinking about, some of the data that we're doing right now, it isn't easy to get from our public API. But you could imagine a version of this exact concept that's literally a template app where the customer can install the insights.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's a little Azure script that'll set up an ADF and a SQL DB, or maybe we make a Power Query connector that's for our API. There's some real challenges there because all APIs are difficult with Power Query.
If you're using Databricks, though, you've got the data lake share thing that's in that environment too. I don't know if that would work for you in this scenario, but you do have the idea of like you can make data by partition data by customer, and then you can start opening up. Okay, well, hey, Mr. Customer, you're going to go get this data in these Delta table things. Go after the stuff that you have permission to go see, and then you can start permissioning basically by partition inside Delta Lake. That gives you that another layer of like, oh, wow, we can do the same pipeline for everyone. Again, now that we're all in blob storage, you can kind of start flattening this data out for customers, and now you can start parameterizing that too if you needed to.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. It's a little bit more opinionated about what tools the customer uses.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we made a script that was just like, hey, here's an Azure function that dumps data into a, B1 Azure SQL, and then if
Sure.
you don't like the Azure SQL, like here, change the connection string or whatever,
Sure.
and dump the data into wherever you want. That's much less opinionated, and it's much easier for the customer to just swipe their credit card and say, yes, I want that,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to, bringing in their BI team and doing something sophisticated.
Sure. Makes sense.
Plus, the other thing is that the data that I have is not all of it is publicly accessible. And so if we were going to do something that was not gated through the salespeople, it would need to hit our public API that's gone through all of those rules.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
So,
Very, very interesting.
yeah.
Awesome.
Any other questions from the chat or comments? I'm seeing on YouTube, but anywhere else?
Nothing on LinkedIn actually at this point. So I don't know. I'll have to double check the LinkedIn usage. I don't see our streaming app doesn't give me good metrics on the LinkedIn side. I can see it on YouTube, but I can't see it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I think with that,
Yeah.
we are good. This has pushed us right up to an hour. Alex, thank you very much for your time on this. We're going to hang out here for just a little bit longer. I have another meeting invite, and I've sent it to both. Hopefully, Seth and Alex, you got a little ping of an email. There is we typically do the presentation portion of our user group, and then we wander over to the other half of our presentation, which is kind of just hang out, talk about Power BI. We call it our happy hour after the meeting effect. Any other, I guess, upcoming events? We have, I believe, November, we're going to have Tommy Puglia talk about our the scanner API. He's talked about it a couple times on the podcast. We're going to do a scanner API thing with Tommy, and I don't think we have anyone teed up for December. Maybe Dan was going to do it, but we'll see if we can rope someone in for a December event as well. Of course, you can always catch the podcast from PowerBI.tips. We have the Explicit Measure podcasts every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Barring we can make our internet work, it'll be funny regardless. And I think that's it. I'm hoping this evening, we can talk some about this new tool that I've kind of came up with and kind of see people's impression on the new DAX generator that Dupler has made over in Europe. So with that, thank you all very much. Alex, thank you very much for your presentation. This was rockstar awesome stuff. And we hope that your next one will be much smoother after using us as your guinea pig.
Well, it's a lot of fun. It'll be interesting because in that user group, it's just a Zoom call and people can come off mute.
Oh, man.
There you go.
It's pluses and minuses. So
It's
we'll have
true.
to see how it goes.
Well, now intros are the other half of our meeting where we go to the Teams meeting. So I'm going to leave this up. I'm going to leave the closing screen here on for about like 5 minutes or so, and then I'm going to fire up the Teams meeting, and then we'll get that let people in there as well, and then I'll join there as soon as we're done with the YouTube streaming event. Alex, thank you very much. Seth, appreciate it. And
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Alex.
We'll see you guys in a little bit. I'll throw the link in the chat window here. So I'll throw the link out there first before I shut anything down. So don't worry, the link's coming. Thank you.